The Great Dividers, and no dumbest bill in America this episode. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. This podcast is called The Great Dividers, and guess who the Great Dividers are? Of course, the President and the Vice President of the United States, as well as the entire leadership of the Democrat Party. In my opinion, they are all about dividing and conquering, and of course, once you divide people and you convince them that you are in separate camps and you convince them that the only camp they can possibly be in is yours, then you can get them on your side. It's even worse than that because the Democrats have decided to even make 9/11 political. Can you imagine? Here is the 20th anniversary of 9/11. It just occurred, as you know. And now we have clips from the President and the United States and the Vice President of the United States, both of whom have very little to say other than trying to make the event political and also trying to divide people. We're going to just focus on this podcast on Kamala. She is the great divider, believe me, when it comes to everything. And as you know, she was just in California campaigning for Gavin Newsom. And then she makes an appearance, not at the border. She makes an appearance not at a press conference to explain Afghanistan or even her remote knowledge of anything with respect to foreign affairs. No, she actually speaks at a 9/11 event in Pennsylvania. And she sends a sick message, not just about 9/11, but a divisive message, and politicizes the entire event. It's just incredible what they're willing to do, in my opinion, to make every event in America political, to divide, because I really think there is a mental health issue going on in that party. I honestly do. I know some people might say, oh, well, Mark, you're just going way too far. I actually do believe that because these are the same people who, use funerals as opportunities to bring up political divisions and make political points. Well, 9/11 is really like a massive funeral. It's a memorial in so many different ways, a reminder, and yet she used it as an opportunity. Kamala Harris used it as an opportunity to divide Americans. She delivered remarks last Saturday to commemorate the 20th anniversary of Islamic terror attack that killed nearly 3,000 Americans. Harris followed Hillary Clinton, Biden, and Bush and trashed Americans in her 9/11 speech. Jihadists murdered 3,000 Americans on 9/11. That is a fact. But Kamala Harris attacked Americans and made the Muslims victims. Well, of course, this is part of the game, right? Because if you can make the jihadists and Muslims victims in 9/11, then what you can do is bring lots of Muslims into the country by the tens of thousands and convince them that they have to join the Democrat Party because the American people dare remember 9/11 for what it was, an attack on the United States of America, an attack on our homeland by Muslim jihadists who hate our way of life, hate our religion, hate everything, hate freedom, hate everything about us. We have a clip. We're going to play it first, and then we're going to discuss it. Here's Kamala Harris. Here it is.
On the days that followed, September 11th, 2001, we were all reminded that unity is possible in America. We were reminded also that unity is imperative in America. It is essential to our shared prosperity, to our national security, and to our standing in the world. And by unity, I don't mean uniformity. We had differences of opinion in 2001, as we do in 2021. And I believe that in America, our diversity is our strength. At the same time, we saw after 9/11 how fear can be used to sow division in our nation. as Sikh and Muslim Americans were targeted because of how they looked or how they worshiped.
So there's Kamala Harris in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, speaking solely about how to further divide America by saying that shortly after 9/11, people who appeared to be Muslim were being attacked, and focusing on that than rather the event itself on 9/11, which is really the relevant event when you were in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. A plane was basically crashed into the ground in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, because American citizens decided to organize on the plane and fight against the Muslim jihadists who tried to hijack the plane and were allegedly going to head towards Washington and potentially crash that plane into the White House or to the Capitol or to some other unknown target. And she decides to talk about diversity based on the way you look, right? This is classic Democrat politics. Right after 9/11, and on 9/11, I mean, we had people who were being attacked who looked like, they look different from us and so forth. I mean, that's not what the 9/11 ceremony is about. And I know I keep saying this. It just shocks me how Democrats use this event to divide people further, which of course is why we're calling this podcast The Great Dividers. It's really all they know how to do. They talk about unity, but what they really mean is they want unity in the way you think. They want groupthink. To them, that is the Democrat way. We want groupthink. Think the way we think. But, Republicans hate diversity, but diversity is defined the way you look. No, actually, Republicans embrace diversity, in particular, diversity of thought. Democrats are terrified of diversity of thought. And Republicans also embrace truth. And part of that truth is that Muslim jihadists decided to kill, and they murdered 3,000 Americans senselessly and horribly in the most evil attack on America's soil in American history. And Kamala Harris decides to use the opportunity to blame Americans for lashing back. I mean, in no way, podcast listeners, am I sitting here saying, we should lash out at anyone who's Muslim. Of course not. That's not what I'm saying. And what's incredible is that's what she's suggesting. She's literally suggesting that you can't live freely in America unless you are a Democrat, when in fact they're the ones who are spending every single living moment trying to divide us. It is really disgusting. And you have to understand that this is the same person who ducks the cameras constantly and ducks reporters when it comes to Afghanistan, when it comes to the border, when it comes to any substantive issue. She only goes and she speaks at events where she's some sort of like keynote speaker, but you can't actually ask her any questions. So you really don't know what Kamala Harris is or what she believes in. What you do know is this: she has prepared remarks, and the prepared remarks are always about further dividing Americans and saying, if you're a Republican, you must be like one of those white guys who doesn't like anyone unless they look just like you. No, actually, if you go into places like Texas, by the way, including in my own community, you'll find enormous amounts of diversity. And that diversity is not just diversity of the way people look, but it's also diversity of the way people think, which is something that escapes Kamala Harris. And to further drive home why we must constantly speak the truth about 9/11, a college snowflake decides to put like 100 or so American flags, like those little American flags that you put up to memorialize 9/11 or to memorialize the death of a soldier or someone who was an American hero. Well, on college campus, this snowflake decides to take all the American flags down, hoping no one's watching, and then puts them in the garbage. Can't make this stuff up. And so here's what happened. On 9/11, memorial flags were put up at a university, and it was at Washington University in St. Louis, where a student was videoed taking flags that were displayed to commemorate the 9/11 attacks and stuffed those flags into garbage bags. Quote, to see a nonpartisan, non-political memorial disgraced without a swift response from the university says volumes, said Washington University College Republicans President Nick Rodriguez, according to Young Americans for Freedom, which posted about the episode. Students had put together a display of 2,977 flags, one for each 9/11 victim, according to Fox News. But according to Student Life, the university's student newspaper, the flags were placed on the field Friday night. The student recorded taking them early Saturday morning was Fidel Akalani, vice president of finance for the student union. In other words, the student government at Washington University. This guy is one of their state senators in the student union. And this gentleman, Fidel Akalani, was triggered because of the fact that flags were put up to memorialize the several thousand deaths, murders, by these perpetrators on 9/11, the Islamic jihadists. And this gentleman, I presume, I don't know for sure, I presume with his name, Fidel Akalani, is Muslim and is triggered by that. And this is part of the problem with Kamala Harris's comments, because what she's doing is she's saying we can't speak truth. We can't speak truth that there are people out there that are extremists that hate our country. But no one hates the country more than Democrats, let's face it, first and foremost. I mean, they're the ones trying to destroy the country. I'm sure they celebrate this particular guy who took these flags down. Well, we have a clip of this, and it's mostly silent. But if you're watching, you can see that this gentleman is being videotaped really closely as he's collecting all these flags as fast as he can and putting them in trash bags, putting them in the garbage can. And you can tell he's very uncomfortable as he's being videotaped because naturally, like most snowflakes, they're used to no one ever correcting them. You can't correct a snowflake. No, mommy never corrected me. You can't do that. You can't videotape me. That's not fair. Well, we have that clip, and here it is. So there he is. He's collecting them.
What's up? Who are you? Okay.
Yeah, putting them all in trash bags.
It's weird when some random person just walks up and photographs you.
Yeah. So we had to play that clip. I know that most podcast listeners can't see this unless they're watching it on YouTube or Rumble. But the fact of the matter is that it's worth knowing that this clip actually exists and that these types of people actually exist on college campuses. And they're empowered by the words of Kamala. They're empowered by our vice president of the United States, who's saying to us that 9/11 really wasn't about, people that killed 3,000 Americans that were Islamic jihadists. No, 9/11 was really about the Republicans in the United States of America who live in the countryside, who then dare to speak the truth about who the perpetrators were, and that there's this massive divide on planet Earth between so many people in the Muslim world, not all of them, but so many of them, who treat women badly, who murder people who are gay and lesbian, who stone women, among many other things. And the fact that we can't actually talk about those things, we can't talk about the fact that they are still in the 7th or 8th century. They haven't even moved into the 21st century. And we want to bring these people into our country. We need to be awfully careful that we're bringing people into our country that want to modernize, that want to move into the 21st century. And so Bill Maher talks about this as well. Last podcast listeners, I spoke about the new segregation. And it's so ironic that like a couple of days after that, Bill Maher spoke about how we have a segregation inversion. In other words, he was talking about the new segregation in his monologue. And he was talking about the new segregation in his monologue because he was criticizing the NFL over the weekend for playing the Black national anthem. Now imagine, we have a national anthem. We are one country, right? E pluribus unum. Oh no. Of course, the NFL, with, once again, the ultimate wokeness, we could say, this is kind of a go woke, go broke for the NFL. They have decided that they were going to play the Black National Anthem. And so in the Hill newspaper, they reported HBO's Bill Maher on Friday, so just last Friday, which was the day after I think I did the podcast on the new segregation, took aim at the NFL's decision to play, quote, "Lift Every Voice and Sing," long considered the Black National Anthem, before games this season, calling it segregation, but under a different name. So the NFL is going to play this song before every single game. The host of Real Time with Bill Maher commented on the NFL's 2021 opening game between the Dallas Cowboys and Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which featured a performance of the song by Alicia Keys before the Star-Spangled Banner was featured. So in other words, in America, we have this new segregation, this division, the constant dividing, where you don't have one national anthem, you have two. Maher said during his Friday show, quote, "Maybe we should get rid of our national anthem, but I think we should have only one national anthem." He continued, "I think when you go down a road where you're having two different national anthems, colleges sometimes now have many of them." And he goes on and on. Well, we have this clip. It's most definitely worth listening to because Bill Maher, remember, he's a liberal. Without question, he's a liberal. But he's a liberal in the traditional sense, which is he believes that we must have common bonds. We must have those things that bring us together as a country. And the constant division by the Democrat Party is destroying the country and kind of speaks to it. Here it is.
I mean, I saw last night on the football game, Alicia Keys sang "Lift Every Voice and Sing," which now I hear is called the Black National Anthem. Now, maybe we should get rid of our national anthem, but I think we should have one national anthem. I think when you go down a road where you're having two different national anthems, colleges sometimes now have, many of them have different graduation ceremonies for black and white, separate dorms. This is what I mean, segregation. You've inverted the idea.
Yeah, so you've inverted the idea of segregation, and you are in that process dividing the country. I mean, where's Martin Luther King when you really need him, right? Because, this is a guy that wanted to bring people together and wanted people to find friendships and find work in the workplace and find communities where they were comfortable, irrespective of the way people look. And that's completely the opposite of the Democrat Party now. I mean, now the Democrat Party, and Kamala Harris said it best, use 9/11 as an opportunity to divide us. The great diversity. Yeah, diversity. And then you have the college snowflake who takes the flags that are commemorating 9/11 off of Washington University's campus. And then you even have Bill Maher, who's now triggered from the left, going, well, wait a minute. I mean, what about America? I mean, do you not want a country? I mean, is this just a place where we live now and we don't really believe in anything? If we don't believe in anything, then the next time we're attacked, are we really going to want to defend ourselves? Or are we going to argue? Well, wait a minute, people in the front line, all the white people and all the black people on the back line. And that way the white people get shot first in the war. I mean, is this where we are? This is ridiculous. But unfortunately, it's where we are. There's no doubt about it. We talked about last podcast about how a university had a barbecue intended only for people of color. And it's pretty interesting, right? Because I'm proud of the fact that last podcast we talked about the new segregation. And here's Bill Maher talking about the new segregation. In this podcast, we're talking about the great dividers, using 9/11 as that opportunity, and also, of course, using vaccine mandates. And this vaccine mandate thing is really scary. And it's really scary for a variety of reasons. And here's one key reason: regulatory capture. So I never knew what regulatory capture was until I got elected. And I served on the committee that deals with like insurance and business issues and regulation and stuff like that, right? And I remember one of my colleagues, good friend, was telling me, he says, we deal with a lot of regulatory capture. And I hadn't really researched the term before. I'd heard it, but it really didn't matter to me. until I realized how important it was. So what is regulatory capture? Well, regulatory capture is when companies that have the resources, they're big enough and are trying to get larger and larger, use the government and use political officials to pass laws to give them an advantage in the regulatory environment. So here's one example. In my committee in Annapolis, and again, podcast listeners, I serve in Annapolis. I rarely talk about this because this is a podcast about the entire country, but this is happening in all 50 states across the country. And sometimes, by the way, it happens very often with Republicans too, who agree with regulatory capture, some of them, and many Democrats who, they also agree with regulatory capture in many cases. And so we had this guy who came before us, who was a lobbyist in our committee, and he was advocating for this absurdly complicated regulation of Airbnb and VRBO and Booking.com. In other words, all of these platforms where you can just go online and book a place to stay. Sometimes that place to stay is in someone's house. Sometimes, it's an apartment. All over the country, of course, all over the world, you can book a place through these platforms now. Well, Airbnb now has a larger market capitalization than Marriott Corporation. The largest hotel company in the world is now smaller than a company that doesn't own any hotels. It's pretty remarkable. So Marriott came to our committee, and they had their lobbyists there. Of course, no Marriott officials, but Marriott was paying for it. And Marriott was coming to us asking for us to heavily regulate all of Airbnb and all of the VRBO, so that they had to register in the state. They had to register with the local government. They had to register with the local town. There had to be a registration fee by every single person. And it just went on and on and on and on. Taxation. I mean, it was incredible. The purpose of this bill was to effectively shut down those platforms in the state of Maryland. And this has happened elsewhere too, just to let you know. This is not to say that there aren't reasonable regulations that can be passed at the local level about these platforms. That wasn't the point. Marriott wanted to put them out of business. That's regulatory capture. That's when you have a lot of money to shut down your competition. Well, guess what? That's exactly what Biden is doing with vaccine mandates. This is regulatory capture because you're saying to all of the businesses across America, according to Joe Biden, 100 employees or more is a big business, that they must have vaccine mandates at their workplace. And so in the Daily Caller, there's an article, "A Decision We Applaud. Big Business Endorses Biden's Vaccine Mandate." Well, there you go. And you want to know why big businesses endorse it? Because it's regulatory capture. It's a way of getting advantage and gaining advantage over smaller companies who may not have the capability of forcing this upon their employees or may not have the wherewithal to hire replacement employees. And it's also a way of shutting down anyone that dissents. So you naturally marry your company to the government for regulatory capture. You say, yeah, you're right, Joe Biden. We agree with you. We're going to make sure we do that too. And we're going to run everybody else that has a different opinion about this out of business. That's regulatory capture. And it's wrong. And it's wrong. And thankfully, some are standing up. So it says here in this article, groups representing big business interests lined up in support of President Joe Biden's sweeping executive order, forcing the private sector to begin mandating workers to get a COVID-19 vaccine. Again, it's an executive order. It's like an edict from the king, right? The king has an edict, and the edict says that you must do this. I'm sorry, no. This is, we live in a republic, right? Democratic republic, you can't do this. Quote, many of us are frustrated with the nearly 80 million Americans who are still not vaccinated, even though the vaccine is safe, effective, and free, Biden said during remarks at the White House on Thursday. We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, he continued. Again, it's like a king with an edict. We've been patient with you, but our patience is running thin before we throw you in the jail. We throw you in the tower, the English tower. Prior to his remarks, Biden signed an executive order giving the Department of Labor the authority to impose vaccine mandates on all businesses with more than 100 employees. The agency's Occupational Safety and Health Administration would be tasked with enforcing the mandate and fining companies that choose not to comply. The action has already been met with legal challenges, but the Business Roundtable, a group that represents some of the largest United States corporations, applauded the president's actions on Thursday. The Business Roundtable welcomes the Biden administration's continued vigilance in its fight against COVID. The Business Roundtable president and COO Joshua Bolton said in a statement, quote, America's business leaders know how critical vaccination and testing are in defeating the pandemic, which is why so many have invested resources in encouraging and incentivizing their customers and employees to get vaccinated. So big business is all in with Joe Biden. All in. And so as you can imagine, they're going to get lots of favors from Joe Biden by being all in. And at the same time, they can make you an unemployed person. And this matters. This matters a lot because we have a president who's acting like a king. We have businesses that are a bunch of crony capitalists engaging in regulatory capture. And then we have this lack of science that relates to people that have already had COVID and might already, by the way, and probably already have what? The COVID antibodies. And that's maybe why they don't want the vaccine. And to further prove that point about regulatory capture and how it's going to affect your life in your employ and with traveling, CNN calls interstate travel a privilege. I kid you not. CNN calls interstate travel a privilege. So there's a doctor on CNN. The doctor's name is Dr. Wen, W-U-E-N, Dr. Wen. And Dr. Wen is Asian. And she says that, we're going to play it for you in a minute. But the article is entitled, Americans Who Wish to Have Privileges Need to Get Vaccinated. I kid you not. Americans who wish to have privileges need to get vaccinated. Having the right to travel interstate is not a constitutional right. Can you believe this? Folks, look, Dr. Wen is on CNN along with Jeffrey Toobin, otherwise known as Zoomin' Toobin. You remember Zoomin' Toobin, right? He was the guy that was pleasuring himself on Zoom. And then he was summarily put on leave, not dismissed. Anyone else would have been dismissed, but Zoomin' Toobin, oh no, they have him back because he's very in sync with CNN's viewers, the Zoomin' CNN viewers. Anyway, we have that clip. You cannot believe this. Listen, here it is.
I absolutely think we should have that requirement. I think it was a major oversight on the part of the Biden administration to not issue this yesterday. And we have to talk about the reason. The reason isn't so much that we need to keep our train travel and plane travel even safer. They are pretty safe, although I definitely think that having a vaccine requirement would make it even safer and probably encourage many people who are vaccinated or who have young kids and want to protect them. Maybe it'll help to encourage those people to start traveling again. But there's an even bigger reason too, which is I think we really need to make it clear that there are privileges associated with being an American, that if you wish to have these privileges, you need to get vaccinated. Travel and having the right to travel interstate, it's not a constitutional right as far as I know to board a plane. And so saying that if you want to stay unvaccinated, that's your choice. But if you want to travel, you better go get that vaccine.
Yes. Now this lady sounds like she's straight from communist China. I'm sorry. And it's not just because she appears to be Chinese. She sounds like a communist dictator. I mean, you don't have the right to travel freely in this country. That's not a right. That's not a constitutional right. Really? We don't have the right to hop in our cars and freely cross state lines and freely cross county lines and city lines, state lines. And I mean, we don't have that right. Who do these people think they are? Who is CNN? I mean, I know we've heard many times CNN stands for the Chinese News Network. It sure sounds like it now. And don't take my word for it. Because, folks, we've said this time and again. What are you worried about? If you're vaccinated, why do you care about those who are vaccine hesitant or don't want to be vaccinated? Many of whom, probably at this point, most of whom have had COVID already. Why do you care? Because if the vaccine works, it doesn't matter. It does. That's their choice. It's a free country. And for full disclosure, podcast listeners, I have parents who are older, obviously, and 81 and 80. And I wanted them to be vaccinated. Okay? I wanted them to be protected. But if you have COVID and you have the COVID antibodies, you might not want this protein spike in your system because you already have the T cells. And once again, I'm not a doctor, but this is just all common sense to me. Well, Fauci didn't have an answer about this either. So Fauci also, I believe, was on CNN or MSNBC. Do you remember which one it was? Looks like CNN. It's CNN. And Fauci's on CNN, and he's asked that key question. And the key question he's asked on CNN is, why is it so important for the unvaccinated who have had COVID to be vaccinated? What's the deal, Dr. Fauci? Well, with Fauci, we do have that clip, and it's worth listening to for sure. And here it is.
And basically, the headline was that natural immunity provides a lot of protection, even better than the vaccines alone. What are people to make of that? So as we talk about vaccine mandates, I get calls all the time. People say, I've already had COVID, I'm protected, and now the study says maybe even more protected than the vaccine alone. Should they also get the vaccine? How do you make the case to them?
That's a really good point, Sanjay. I don't have a really firm answer for you on that. That's something that we're going to have to discuss regarding the durability of the response. The one thing the paper from Israel didn't tell you is whether or not, as high as the protection is with natural infection, what's the durability compared to the durability of a vaccine. So it is conceivable that you got infected, you're protected, but you may not be protected for an indefinite period of time. So I think that is something that we need to sit down and discuss seriously, because you very appropriately pointed out it is an issue, and there could be an argument for saying what you said.
And so that's Dr. Fauci admitting that you obviously have natural immunity if you had COVID. But at the same time, he's like doing the sidestep. Yeah, well, there's a study in Israel and it's a really good study, but we're not really sure, if that natural immunity is better than the vaccine, or whether or not, at some much later date, you could, folks, look, it's your body. You get to decide if you want to get the vaccine or not. Look, here's where we are in this. The Democrats are using this to divide people. They're using the vaccine mandate to divide people. They're using it as regulatory capture. And to prove to you how stupid they are, Kamala Harris was questioned after announcing steps for protecting the vaccinated. Okay, so this is Fox News, and we're going to read to you this article, but also we're going to read to you the tweets which you are going to laugh at, because Kamala herself tweeted. So Vice President Kamala Harris raised eyebrows on Sunday with her tweet urging Americans to help protect already vaccinated people in order to end the COVID-19 pandemic. And here's what she put out there. She tweeted, by vaccinating the unvaccinated, increasing our testing, and masking and protecting the vaccinated, we can end this pandemic. That's exactly what we are committed to doing. Well, Christine Pushaw tweeted, protecting the vaccinated? How? What does she mean by that? Again, here's what Kamala tweeted. By vaccinating the unvaccinated, increasing and testing our masking and protecting the vaccinated, okay, protecting the vaccinated is what she's saying, by vaccinating the unvaccinated. Well, that doesn't make sense, because if you're vaccinated, then by definition, you're protected. So why do they care? And so this is Kamala Harris. This is how they're dividing people. And so Joe Cunningham said, well, if being vaccinated is not protecting the vaccinated, then what the hell is it even for? And Jim Treacher, Substack.com, protecting the vaccinated. That's what the vaccine is for, again and again and again. What on earth does this even mean, is what another Twitter person said. Protecting the vaccinated. Maybe I'm crazy, but hear me out. Isn't that what the vaccine is supposed to do? So everybody, one person after another, is saying to Kamala, why are you trying to protect the vaccinated from the unvaccinated? Because that just makes us more suspicious about the entire thing. I mean, what is wrong with these people? Folks, to prove my point about regulatory capture, how the Democrats are dividing people, and how this entire pandemic is wreaking havoc with, I think, common sense across America. Here's Jen Psaki talking at a press conference. She's given a question by Ducey. And let me just read this real quick, because you're not going to believe this. Press Secretary Jen Psaki dismissed a question from Fox News' Peter Ducey on why American businesses with 100 or more employees are required to vaccinate workers, but migrants at the southern border are not required to vaccinate. So Steve Ducey's at a press conference, and he asks the key question, and this is where this podcast is really leading up to, ladies and gentlemen. It's leading up to this point where we have two Americas, and we have two Americas intentionally because the Democrats are dividing people and they're providing misinformation and they're awful at trying to explain it. But now, finally, Jen Psaki explained it. We now know exactly what they're up to. Listen to this question from Ducey to Psaki. Here it is.
Why is it that you're trying to require anybody with a job or anybody who goes to school to get the COVID-19 vaccine, but you are not requiring that of migrants that continue walking across the southern border into the country?
Well, look, our objective is to get as many people vaccinated across the country as humanly possible. And so the president's announcement yesterday was an effort to empower businesses, to give businesses the tools to protect their workforces. That's exactly what we did. But certainly we want everybody to get vaccinated, and more people are vaccinated, whether they are migrants or whether they are workers, protects more people in the United States.
But it's a requirement for people at a business with more than 100 people. It is not a requirement for migrants at the southern border. Why?
That's correct. Go ahead.
Jen Psaki was asked by Peter Ducey, so it's a requirement in the workplace to get vaccinated. So you need to get vaccinated in order to work. But in order to illegally enter the country, it is not a requirement to be vaccinated. Ladies and gentlemen, there is something really wrong with this administration. There's something really wrong in America right now, because as an American citizen, you now have less rights than people coming in who are non-citizens. And we have regulatory capture. You're being told you are going to go broke. You are going to not be employable, because if you work for a company with 100 employees or more, you can't work. It's the old non-essential versus essential nonsense that they started during the beginning of this pandemic, which I said from the very beginning was incredibly dangerous. It was incredibly dangerous to tell people they weren't essential and tell them to stay home and that you can't work. And now we see where that has led. Now we're telling people you are not essential because you haven't been vaccinated. Well, boss, what about the fact that I had COVID? I already had it. And, I got through it with no problem at all. So I just don't think it's necessary. Doesn't matter. You're no longer essential. Too bad. But by the way, that illegal immigrant who's willing to work for nothing, oh, he's essential. Oh, he's perfect. And that's where the Democrats have taken us. That's where they've taken us. That's the great dividers. They are the great dividers. Quote, by the way, case in point. We have the 9/11 memorial in New York, and AOC and Pelosi are there, right? AOC and Pelosi, among others. Chuck Schumer is there too. And they were at Ground Zero for the ceremonies. Of course, they wanted to be there for the photo op, naturally, because none of those people could care less, I'm convinced. But anyway, they're there nonetheless. And Pelosi and AOC were caught on camera at Ground Zero amongst, thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And guess what they did? they weren't wearing masks. So Anthony DeWitt tweets out, breaking news, the Speaker of the House, Pelosi, and AOC, Jerry Nadler, and Kathy Hochul, and dozens of other Democrats are seen in New York City around hundreds without masks on before news media and cameras showed up. Their hypocrisy is disgusting and must be exposed. In other words, they had no masks on. They were there amongst each other and they're talking, here we are at 9/11, isn't this great? And they are. They're all chatting with one another and being all chummy, no masks, amongst all these people in Manhattan. And then the media shows up and they all put their masks on. So if you're wondering, podcast listeners, if you're wondering why so many Americans, why 80 million plus Americans don't want to get the vaccine, and why they are vaccine hesitant or why they are concerned about this vaccine and concerned about the pandemic, but in a different way. Why are they suspicious? Why are they skeptical? This is why. Because they see their leaders saying one thing and doing another. They see the incredible hypocrisy. I mean, did you know, podcast listeners, that members of Congress and their staff are exempt from the Biden COVID-19 vaccine mandate? Yeah. So in military news, American military news, President Joe Biden's sweeping federal employee vaccine mandate announced this week does not apply to members of Congress, the employees who work for Congress, or the federal court system. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki confirmed on Thursday. Through an executive order issued by Biden, all federal workers, including the White House, all federal agencies, and all members of the armed services must take the COVID-19 vaccine with no testing option to opt out. You can't even test. You can't even take a couple of tests a week to prove that you don't have COVID. However, the new rule does not apply to members of Congress. It does not apply to members of Congress, the congressional employees, or employees within the federal court system. The president's order states that he will require all federal executive branch workers to be vaccinated, and that the order will extend it to employees of contractors that do business with the federal government. As part of this effort, the Department of Defense, the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Indian Health Service, and the National Institute of Health will complete implementation of their previously announced vaccination requirements that covers 2.5 million people. So how do you like that? You are required to get the vaccine to work. Otherwise, you cannot work. You're required to get the vaccine to travel across state lines. But if you are a congressman or if you work there, you don't have to do any of those things. You're special. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why things are so messed up. This is why people are so incredibly skeptical of what is happening in the United States of America today. As Jen Psaki said, yeah, we don't really care if those people crossing the border get tested or not. And we don't care to even vaccinate them prior to releasing them. We just, we're just going to, but if you're an American, you better make sure that you're vaccinated. So we have a new one. Okay. This isn't even a go woke or go broke because it's too serious. Most of the go wokes or go broke we can laugh at and just, set aside to say, boy, these people are stupid. This one's too serious. There are trigger warnings that have been added to the founding documents. Yeah. So the National Archives has added trigger warnings to historical founding documents, including the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. So in Washington, D.C., the abject stupidity of the triggered left knows no bounds. According to Representative Lauren Boebert, Republican Colorado, the National Archives in Washington, D.C. has added a disclaimer to their website saying that some of our historical documents, including the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution, may contain harmful content. Boebert tweeted, "The National Archives have now put a disclaimer on their website that our historical documents may include harmful content. They even slapped this warning on the Constitution. We tried to tell you, the left wanted to get rid of it." So that is a United States congressman who put that out there. And some of the items that may be added to this particular, like like a trigger warning, if you will, is they might reflect racist, sexist, ableist, misogynist, misogynoir, xenophobic opinions and attitudes. Be discriminatory towards or exclude diverse views on sexuality, gender, religion, and more. Include graphic content of historical events such as violent death, medical procedures, crime wars, terrorist acts, natural disasters, and more. Demonstrate bias and exclusion in institutional collecting and digitizing policies. So podcast listeners, Democrats are the great dividers. They want groupthink. They want us all to think the same. They want us to think that the way they do. And now they want us to destroy our founding documents and convince us that they're so fatally flawed that we need historical context in order for you to properly understand them, because you're not capable of understanding them in the context and the time frame in which they were written. You can't, talk about them or explain them that those documents were written as a result of the many thousands of years of human experience and trying to create a democracy and a way of explaining to people that their rights come to them from God and not from government. But of course, Democrats want you to know that, by the way, your rights come from government. They don't come from God. So unbelievable. Unbelievable. It just gets worse and worse. And by the way, I want you to know, podcast listeners, I'm a very positive person. I mean, when I talk sarcastically about these things, I'm still a positive person. I believe that our country is going to survive these things. I really do. But only if we organize and fight back. And only if we continue to maintain that truth is on our side and explain what that truth is. We have to be very articulate. We have to do our research. We have to be ready and to respond to these people. But we have to get in office first to do that, right? We have to get these bad people out of office, and these people who are running the administrative state. And the administrative state, of course, are all the people running the departments that are in Washington, D.C., the many thousands and thousands of employees who are also into this wokeness. And what they don't understand, and I don't really think they do, is when they destroy the United States of America, what comes in its place? What happens? What is it to be replaced with? I mean, socialism, of course. Marxism. That's what they want. They have no idea what it will bring, but that's what they want. And so I have an interesting story for you podcast listeners before we go. In the Wall Street Journal, there's a very interesting story. It's entitled, "Everything Must Go. The American Car Dealership is Up for Sale." And this is one of those super millennial stories, because it's about how car dealerships are increasingly being collapsed into each other. And so you have, in theory, big mega dealerships that are buying the small dealerships, but you have also a lot of dealerships that are just going out of business. And why is that? Well, people are buying cars online, almost unheard of. I can understand buying a new car online. A used car, I'm not really sure it's a good idea. I mean, what is that company where it's the Carvana? That's it. It's like, it's like a bunch of cars in this glass like tower, and it turns around and they're all used. And you can decide what kind of car you want and go online, and they're going to stand by. Okay, maybe that works. Maybe it doesn't. I'm not really sure. But this idea of buying a brand new car online, yes, I've done that before, because it sort of beats having to deal with the salesperson. I'm just, you just negotiate online, and you just go back and forth with the emails between, 5 or 10 different dealerships, and you see if you can get the best price for the exact same car with the exact same options. And nonetheless, this is what's happening. And it's interesting because it's kind of a watershed in American history, because the car dealership experience is uniquely part of the baby boomer generation, not so much with millennials, believe me. Millennials are like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I just want to buy my car online. I don't want to talk to this idiot, who's going to tell me about how he's going to try to sell me the undercoating, of the car and charge me an extra $5,000. So for nearly a century, the American car dealership has retained its iconic appearance, even as technology transformed every corner of the business landscape. In towns across the country, local business titans lured customers to glass-walled showrooms and large asphalt lots where buyers bargained for the best price. Now, the model is showing its age. The way people buy and sell cars is changing. More of it is happening online as buyers get comfortable with competing transactions remotely or completing transactions remotely. It is a shift that started before the pandemic, but accelerated over the last 18 months as COVID-19 spurred people to do more of their shopping from home and demand for cars unexpectedly surged. The auto dealership, as a result, could soon look like other parts of the business world upended by e-commerce. National chains, instead of local small businesses, will set prices and give salespeople less room to haggle. Dealers will hold fewer cars on the lot and operate more like service and delivery centers, using their dealership as hubs where customers can pick up vehicles ordered online and get them serviced. I think Tesla actually had a lot to do with this, because Tesla, their business model was always, they're not going to have any dealerships, none. When you buy a Tesla, you're buying directly from Tesla. And you can go and make an appointment to test drive a Tesla. But the fact of the matter is, it really isn't fundamentally like a real, like, massive dealership. That might be they're just a few models. You go there, you try out the model, and you choose the color that you want, and you order it online, and the car gets, delivered to you. Well, that's what Americans, specifically, by the way, millennials, that's specifically what they want to see. And the upside of this is you don't have to deal with the salesperson, okay? And I'll be the first to admit, I agree that that's not a fun experience. And I will tell you that when my daughter went to buy her first car, she asked me to help her, and I said, gladly. So she decided on leasing her first car and not buying it. And we went to a number of different dealerships first so that she could try out the car and see which one she wanted before we went online to actually have them compete with each other. So she decided on the car, and the first two dealerships, it was unbelievable. The first dealership wanted $450 a month lease. The second dealership wanted $179 for the lease. Now, it was the exact same car. It was the exact same car. And of course, you hear the salesperson, oh yeah, but this car is special. I mean, you can have it today. Right now, you can drive it off the lot. I mean, just hear the guy talking. It's awful. And so I'm not going to miss that. But I do think it's sad that so many of these car dealerships are longtime family-owned businesses, and they're being bought out or closed by the collapsing of the industry by these mega corporations. That's sad, because that's in part the really downside of e-commerce. E-commerce, very convenient, very fast, streamlines everything, makes things a lot more simple, helps the supply chain be more efficient, but also puts thousands and thousands of people out of business. And as we see this happening more, see this happening more and more across America, I can only hope there are new industries that pop up in the country, and those new industries take the place. I don't know what they are, by the way. I mean, I guess chip making, software developing. What else? 5G, anything that has to do with 5G and the Internet of Things. I mean, but you obviously need a very different education to do those things than I think you do to open up a car dealership. So the economy continues to change. COVID is changing those things. The Democrats are using COVID as an opportunity to divide people, just like they used an opportunity for 9/11 to divide people. Good old Kamala Harris. And in every single podcast, I try to the best of my ability to provide updates on what these changes in the economy are doing, and the fact that we need to be cognizant of them and ready for them and prepared for them. Because as our country is changing and dividing internally, it's also changing economically, and they are interrelated, I think. A lot of the displeasure of American government by many Americans is because their jobs have been gutted, and they don't know why. And it's happened kind of overnight, and they weren't prepared for a variety of reasons. Well, that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thanks to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.